Hey guys, it's Madison Estes. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about the best and worst horror movies of 2023. We have a lot of movies to get through, so I'm just going to get straight to it. Starting off with the 5 best horror films. Coming in at number 5 is Scream 6. Now, I was not a huge fan of the last Scream movie. For those of you that haven't seen it, essentially it was just a regular slasher film, except they introduced Billy Loomis's illegitimate daughter, Sam, who also has a half-sister, and they have a very complicated relationship that had begun to be explored in the last film. Overall, I was just kind of let down by that film, but this film more than makes up for it. Pretty much picks up where the last one left off. Sam and her sister have moved away. They're in New York City now, which was kind of one of the selling points of this film. It was heavily marketed as being in New York City. And it was interesting. It was interesting taking a serial killer that is notorious for murdering in suburbs and then putting him in the city. Randomly setting your horror movie in New York City doesn't always work out, as we've seen with one of the Jason movies, but in this case I felt like it worked really well. My favorite scene was probably the scene in the gas station where they're trying to hide from Ghostface. I thought it was really tense, and I thought that they really did a good job of paying off the use of New York City in the film. Like all of the other Scream movies, this was a whodunit, and although I did guess some of the twists, I didn't guess all of it, so I was really surprised by one of the twists in this story, and I really enjoyed it. Also, I think the kills in this movie are great. There is a scene with a ladder that they use to try to go from one building to another, and that scene is very intense, and I thought that the payoff was great. And I don't really have anything negative to say here. I started to actually really care about Sam and the rest of the core 4, or whatever the name was. I really started to enjoy those characters a lot more, and I just don't really have anything negative to say about this film. It definitely wasn't a perfect film by any means. I'm sure if I really tried I could find a couple of small things to nitpick, but it's just a really enjoyable whodunit slasher film. I give it 4 out of 5 stars. Next up is Evil Dead Rise. Now, I know some of you are going to be like, this should be higher on the list, and some of you are going to be like, why is this on your list at all? I thought it was fun. I thought that it was a really scary movie, and it probably helps that I saw this at the drive-in. I don't know if I'm gonna have the same experience rewatching this at home, but it was very creepy and atmospheric. The plot isn't that great. It's just like every other Evil Dead movie, honestly, except it's in an apartment. This is another case of, a franchise that has had several installments, pretty much just being set in a new location, and that adding a really innovative and interesting element to the story. The actress that plays the mother that gets possessed did a really good job. My mom and I had so much fun just over and over going, "Mommy's with the maggots now," because we're very weird. It was just fun. It was a fun horror film that genuinely made me squeamish in some parts. I really enjoyed the main character, Beth. She finds out that she's pregnant early on in the film, and then those mama bear instincts kick in whenever she has to take care of her nephew and nieces whenever the mother gets possessed. The ending was also wild. It's not going to appeal to everyone because it starts off as a very grounded horror film. I mean, as grounded as any possession horror film can be. And then it just gets like balls to the walls crazy in the last act. Although if you are a fan of the Evil Dead franchise, you should know to expect that. My only criticism with this film is that it is a bit lacking in terms of plot, but I did like the fact that they were willing to really go there with the gore, and in terms of, anyone can die in this film, even children. So that was an interesting element that you just don't see that often in horror films. I give Evil Dead Rise 4 out of 5 stars. Next up on the list is Thanksgiving. This movie takes place 1 year after a Black Friday shopping massacre where a bunch of people were killed trying to get the best deal, and the killer is going around murdering people that were there that night, seemingly out of revenge. This movie was so much fun. It reminded me of the early Scream movies, even though this does take place in present times. I think something about it just makes it feel like an instant classic. It's a really good holiday whodunit slasher film. There's a wide cast of characters, a lot of them are interesting, several of them have things that make them seem suspicious, so you're never sure who the killer is. The deaths were creative, a lot of them were holiday inspired, and this is Eli Roth, and he is not afraid of some gore, so this was a very bloody film. And there was one dinner scene that was pretty disturbing. It stuck in my head the next day as I was cutting into a rotisserie chicken. I started to get flashbacks from this movie, so there's definitely some very gory parts that just stuck with me. This was a gory, fun, and stylish film that had a cast of interesting characters and a whodunit element that kept me on the edge of my seat. I give Thanksgiving 4.5 out of 5 stars. Coming in at number 2 is Box Barcelona. So I saw this film just a couple of weeks ago, even though it was released much earlier this year. Honestly, I was just watching it so I had a couple more films to add to my all of the movies I've seen this year list. And I was so impressed by this film. For those of you not familiar with the Bird Box universe, this is a world where if you go outside, some kind of force, they don't know if it's aliens or some celestial being, but essentially your eyes glaze over and you immediately try to kill yourself. There's a very small group of people who, whenever they encounter whatever this thing is, instead of killing themselves, they go crazy and try to open other people's eyes and make them be exposed to whatever this thing is. I hope I've explained this well. It's not a super easy thing to explain, but it makes sense when you see it in the movie. So this movie begins with a man and his daughter, and they're talking and they're having these cute dad-daughter moments, and then he sees a group of people and he leaves their daughter in order to join them to find out if they're good people. And I started off thinking, okay, this is like The Last of Us, this is like The Walking Dead, this is a story about a dad trying to protect his child in the apocalypse. The Road by Cormac McCarthy, that's another one. I'm like, I've seen this story many times before, but it is a compelling plot, and I do like the original Bird Box film, so I'll give it a shot. But it takes a very different turn very early in the story. This is not your stereotypical, oh, I have to protect my child in the apocalypse. There's actually 2 stories going on. There's the story in the past, which takes place right when the apocalypse starts, and then there's the present day storyline, which takes place presumably at least a few years after the apocalypse. And this movie goes back and forth between flashbacks of the past and the present, sort of showing us how this character has evolved and become the man that he is when this movie begins. But the present day storyline is very interesting, and I really like how this movie makes you think that it's going to be one thing, and then it shifts gears completely, and then it kind of plays with your expectations for the rest of the film. In addition to the fact that the plot was clever, I really liked the main character and some of the secondary characters as well. There's also just a lot of really disturbing, horrifying imagery in this film. I mean, people going crazy and immediately killing themselves is pretty horrifying. I thought that the first one did a really good job of balancing drama and horror, and I think this one does an equally good job. In fact, now that I'm thinking about it, it's kind of hard for me to tell you if I liked the first one, and I liked the first one quite a bit. It was probably my favorite horror movie that year. I like this one almost as much as the first one. Maybe even more in some ways, because as much as I like the first one, it really does kind of follow some familiar tropes of woman trying to protect a child in the apocalypse, whereas this one plays with those expectations and is a little bit more clever in my opinion. Although the first one has Sandra Bullock and is a really good emotional horror story, so they're both good, they're just different. Overall, I give Bird Box Barcelona 5 out of 5 stars. Now for my favorite horror movie of the year. This was not easy because, like I said, I really liked Bird Box Barcelona, and there was a few other films that I mentioned in the top 5 that I liked quite a bit, but this was my favorite film of the year, and that is Saw 10. Saw 10 delivered in every single way, starting with the fact that it was an intraquel, which is not something that you get very often in any kind of series. An intraquel is an installment that takes place between 2 previously established films in a series, this movie taking place between Saw 1 and Saw 2. Although that doesn't mean you should watch them in that order. I want to say something right now. If you haven't seen any of the Saw films and you want to get started, you need to at least watch Saw 1 through 4 in order before you watch this film. Otherwise, you are going to get hit with some major spoilers. That's just one thing that really bugged me, is people saying, oh yeah, you don't need to see any of the other Saw films, or just go see Saw 1 and 2 and then go see 10. It's like, no, oh my gosh, you're going to be spoiling so much if you do that. Alright, so now that I've done my due diligence and warned you, this movie takes place between Saw 1 and 2. It involves John Kramer testing a con artist who tricks people into giving them money and making them think that they had some kind of innovative life-saving procedure that cures their cancer. What's really interesting about this film is that John Kramer is the protagonist. He's never been the protagonist before. He's been an anti-hero in some of these films, but he's never been like the core character that we're meant to identify with. And I think that that's why this film has gotten so much hype this year. I think this is why it's actually getting some critical acclaim, whenever, you know, Saw is usually called the torture porn series, although I've never seen it that way. You know, I do think that that element of, you know, John Kramer being the protagonist and us having all of these moments where we're meant to sympathize with him really made a huge difference in how people saw this film. And let's be real, the traps were cool. They were really, really cool. I liked them so much more than the traps we've gotten in really the past 3 movies, although they've all had a couple of good traps. I mean, I think every Saw movie has at least a couple of really good traps. I wouldn't say this movie is the best in terms of traps. I still think that Saw 5 has probably most of the best traps in the series, and then Saw 6 has a lot of the best poetic traps. But I do think the traps in this movie were very gory, and we're also getting back to some of the more simple and grounded traps in this movie, which is something that fans have been asking for a long time, and you can tell that they really listened and tried to implement that as much as possible. And I also really loved the storyline between John Kramer and his accomplice. I'm trying to be as vague as possible for people that maybe have never watched a single Saw movie so that I don't spoil it. But the relationship that develops between these two characters in other movies has always been one of my favorite parts of the series, and I really love how they got deeper into their relationship, and all of the scenes between the two of them were amazing. My only criticism with this film is that Saw is a series that is known for jaw-dropping twists and complexity, and this film was a little bit more on the simpler side, and I did guess the twist. I do think the twist was executed really well, and I enjoyed watching it more the second time around because I was able to focus more on John and the storyline and not, you know, guessing what the twist is going to be. So I think it has a really high rewatch value, and I think that this is an amazing installment in the Saw series. I give Saw 10 5 out of 5 stars. Now on to the films that were not so successful. Starting with Five Nights at Freddy's. I was so looking forward to this film. I thought it was going to be one of the best films of the year, honestly. You know, it has a great cast. It's got Matthew Lillard. It's got Elizabeth Lail from the show You. It's got Josh Hutcherson from Hunger Games. And it's such a fun premise, you know. It's about a place that has animatronics that can kill you. You know, I wasn't sure if it was supernatural. I wasn't sure if it was like evil robots. But either way, I was really excited, and I was looking forward to a fun and funny, campy horror movie, which is not what this was. It was a little bit campy, but not in the good way. This movie took itself way too seriously. It had no self-awareness at all. I'm just really baffled. How do you look at that premise of murderous animatronics and go, I want to make a serious horror drama based around that? Also, how do you not make it funny? Like, even if you're going to go with a semi-serious storyline, you can still add jokes in the film. And they had Matthew Lillard, who is well known for providing comic relief in horror films. And I'm just like, how do you not utilize him more or give him a bigger role or something? Like, it just seems like him in this type of movie was just a recipe for success. And I'm just like, how do you take all of these ingredients and mess up so bad? I know what it is. They took it too seriously, and I feel like every other flaw with this film stems from that fact that they just decided to try to make this into a serious film, and that was a huge mistake. The only redeeming thing about this film is the opening is pretty cool. I have to give it that. In fact, when I saw the opening, I was like, what are people saying? This film's gonna be great. And then almost everything else that happened after that was not great. The acting isn't awful in some parts of the film, so I'll give it credit for that. But there's not really a whole lot to like here. I give Five Nights at Freddy's 2 out of 5 stars. Next up is The Pope's Exorcism. This movie, I mean, it's a generic exorcism movie that doesn't have any scenes that are particularly scary or interesting, and it's just a generic possession film. I'm honestly not going to spend that much time talking about it because I don't think that it deserves that time. It's just, everything about it is boring. There was one scene maybe where they go into some kind of underground well, and I thought, oh, something interesting's happening, and then the story just immediately veers off in a very boring direction. Some of the acting was also kind of bad and melodramatic, although honestly I don't think any amount of acting could have saved this terrible script, so I give The Pope's Exorcist 1.5 out of 5 stars. Next up is Infinity Pool. I know this is going to be controversial for some people, although I have encountered far more people that didn't like this film than liked it. However, you know, my rating system is not based on, you know, general consensus or what other people think. This channel is just my opinion. So I didn't like this film. I thought that it was a missed opportunity. It was like a series of missed opportunities. This story is about a man who accidentally kills someone, but lucky for him, he's rich and he's able to buy a clone that will suffer the punishment for his crimes. I think this premise is fantastic, and it's a shame that the movie really didn't do anything interesting with it at all. I had a feeling early on this film was not going to be what I wanted it to be whenever the main character is already cheating on his wife and being a total douchebag at the very beginning of the film. I kind of felt like I would have liked to have seen a nuanced story about a guy who's overall a pretty decent guy, who gets, you know, in this situation with the accidental killing and he feels awful, but, you know, the opportunity to escape punishment is just too alluring, and then, you know, you could see his morality spiral out of control from there. That would have been really interesting, but unfortunately this guy's a dick from the very first scene. Again, he's cheating on his wife with Mia Goth, she's jerking him off, and there's a really gratuitous close-up of his cum on the ground. Look, I'm all for gratuitous violence, I'm all for gratuitous sex every now and then, but this wasn't sexy, this wasn't fun, this wasn't anything. Like, it was just shocking to be shocking, and I kind of feel like that was the theme of the whole film. There was a lot of scenes of guys like pissing on other guys and cum and things like that, and it just felt like a really amateur attempt to get people talking about this film, just to stir up some hype. But there wasn't any substance underneath all of that shock value. So the character is, you know, unlikable and unrelatable from the very first scene, and that never changes throughout the story. The premise isn't fully explored. The plot really doesn't go anywhere because, you know, it doesn't set anything up in the second act. It's pretty much as soon as he gets his clone, he starts doing vile and despicable things, and this continues until the film ends. And it doesn't really have much of an ending either. It's kind of an ambiguous ending. It's kind of a non-ending, actually. It's not even ambiguous, just like really nothing happened at the end because the second act doesn't set anything up. So yeah, it's disappointing in every single way I can think of. I give Infinity Pool 1 out of 5 stars. So this might not be totally fair, and I might get some shit for this, but honestly, life is short and I'm not going to finish watching a film that I despise. So I'm gonna go ahead and rate this film, and I'm gonna include it on my worst of list, even though I didn't technically finish it. But hey, if this was your favorite film of the year, let me know in the comment section below, and I'll go ahead and finish it just for you. Coming up at number 2 on my worst of list is Appendage. It starts off okay. It's about a seamstress that's going to some preppy school. The teacher is giving her a hard time, saying that she doesn't have any original ideas, she lacks creativity and focus. She starts having all these horrible negative emotions, and they begin to manifest as appendages on her body. Now, the premise was very weird, but I was on board with it. The trailer looked really cool. The first time we see something like emerging from her, I was like, this is some really cool body horror. But then it gets campy and stupid really fast whenever the appendage begins talking to her and is like a sentient being. I know if you watch this channel regularly, you're like, Madison, you were all on board to watch a horror movie about sentient snow. Why can't you watch a horror movie about a sentient appendage? I don't know. I think the main thing is that this was just marketed as being like a body horror movie, and I wasn't in the mood for campy, but honestly, it's not even fun enough to be campy. Like, you have to have a certain fun and funny tone to be a campy horror movie that's entertaining, and this was kind of boring and dry, and I couldn't get on board with the talking appendage. It just wasn't doing it for me. And even before then, I wasn't like super excited about the character or anything else that was going on in the story. I understand that, you know, this is supposed to be about like a woman feeling insecure and the people in her life being shitty to her, and I guess this appendage is supposed to be like her inner self manifesting. I also kind of get a sense that, you know, this is another story about the creative artist who's misunderstood, but by the end of the story she'll have her revenge, and I also was not on board for that because that seemed really predictable and cheesy. I only watched it for 30 minutes, but it's 30 minutes of my life I will never get back. I give Appendage 1 out of 5 stars. So coming in at number 1 for the worst horror movie of the year is Skinnamarink. I don't even know what to say about this movie. except for the fact that this has kind of given me a new appreciation for every other movie that I've ever seen in my entire life. This includes Appendage, this includes The Blair Witch Project, which I'm not a fan of. This includes everything. It even includes the movie that I thought was the worst movie of the year last year, Abandoned, with Emma Roberts. This so-called film has made me appreciate all of those other films much more because at least those films had characters, dialogue, plot, story. Something that at least resembles story. This had none of those things. So the premise that appears on IMDb, but that does not appear in the story, in my opinion, is that there are two boys that wake up in the middle of the night and they cannot find their father, and it appears as though all of the doors and windows in their house are disappearing. That actually sounds somewhat interesting, but that's not what happens in this film. This is a film, I use it lightly, that is just a series of close-ups of doors and windows. There's literally a shot of a door that just lasts for like 2 minutes. The door's not doing anything, it's not opening, it's not closing, it's just a door. And also there's a weird grainy filter on the film that makes it almost impossible to even see that clearly. I guess it's supposed to be scary, but honestly I found it very irritating and annoying, and I kind of was over the whole filter about 3 minutes into the film. I was already frustrated. I was almost instantly bored and irritated and even a little confused. I was like, is this the film? Like, did somebody accidentally upload the wrong thing on Shudder? Like, what is this? Honestly, I kind of thought that like as maybe somebody had uploaded it as a prank on Shudder or something. I was stunned, and then I got online and found out that's actually what the so-called film is. It is. It's just close-ups of doors and windows. There's like one shot that's like the back of a boy's head, which was an interesting decision, I guess, to have a character in your movie, but you only see the back of his head. And then I think you see a face at the end of the film. I'll be honest, I fast-forwarded parts of this because life is short, and this film is an insult to the audience, in my opinion. I think there's no excuse for having a 2-minute shot of a door. Yeah, like I said, I think that this is more of a audio-visual experience than an actual story, because there's no chronological series of events, there's no dialogue, which there are ways to make films without dialogue, but there's not even shots of two characters interacting, so you can't even interpret nonverbal body language. There's really nothing to this so-called film. This is just, it's the worst. It's the worst movie I've ever seen. It's not just the worst horror movie, it's the worst movie, period. Again, I feel like it's insulting to call it a movie. It's insulting to movies that actually have scripts, that actually try to do something. I give Skinnamarink 0 out of 5 stars, because in order to have at least 1 star on my channel, you have to actually be a movie. So I'm curious to know what your favorite horror movie was of 2023, and also what your least favorite was. What was the one that came out this year that you just really, really hated? Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below, and we can rage together. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and be sure to subscribe. On this channel, I post reviews, writing advice, horror commentary, and vlogs. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you later.